So when we're lighting this thing out, we want to bring in the terrain so that we can see where all the shadows will eventually fall. So on the scene import, let's go ahead and browse for all the original geo. One thing we'll have to do to actually bring that in though, is we'll have to go to the string here and say /2 stars to grab everything. As soon as we do that, we now have all of our terrain. And in addition to that, it makes sense to assign a shader that will turn that terrain black. Eventually, we want to have the option of using XPU to render this out quickly. So for that reason, we need to use a Material X material to actually shade this black and have it hold up with XPU. So whenever you do that, unfortunately, there's no Material X builder. We have to just kind of make things in the actual material library here. Let's create a collect, and we'll call this our environment collect. And that is what we'll actually point to when we assign the shader. Type in Material X standard surface, and that plugs into the shader right there. Now with this Material X standard surface, let's change the base color to orange to get us started, and be sure that we can actually assign this to the geometry properly. So there's environment collect. Let's assign this to all of the original geo, and then 2 stars like that. So there we go. Now everything is being applied properly. Set that to black. We're going to take our specular, set that to 0, specular roughness 0, index of refraction 1. So now if I was to use Karma, we would see that everything turns black, like this. But because it's black and because the geometry is there, we now have all the shadowing information happening as well. So let's pause that real quick. And I'm going to start off by bringing this to a frame where we don't have the fire involved. So when you shade for pyro, think of shading it for the smoke first, and then worry about how it looks with the actual fire once you've lit just the smoke. So let's take this to frame 60 as an example. We will restart Karma, and then I'll show you guys what we need to start thinking about. The first thing you do is think about the environment. Where is the light coming from, and is that going to match the light direction in the plate? So let's go back to our plate, and you'll notice that the lighting generally comes from the center right here. So let's go ahead and actually draw over where we think the lighting is coming from. If we look at the sky right along here, there's a nice summer sun. That's coming down right here, and it's casting a shadow kind of like that. And it's going down that direction and also creating a shadow going this way. And so if you don't have the directions of your shadows matching up, there's nothing you can do to make this blend nicely with your plate. And eventually we'll actually look through that light that we have in Redshift and make a directional light in Mantra that mimics the exact angle. But this light is probably the most important thing to have in order to match your plate properly. So that's where we start. And if we take a look at what we have already, that's kind of what's happening, right? We have a sun that's up here with our HDR, and that for the most part is matching that direction. So as soon as you have that, the next thing to start thinking about is the overall quality of the object. And what I mean by quality is the silhouette nice? Is the form nice? And by form, I mean, is the detail being exposed by the lighting? So here's what I mean. We do have a rim, so the silhouette is there. It's noticeable. We can pick out the silhouette. That's good. And that, again, naturally comes from the light direction along here, right? But the issue with this right now is that there's not a lot of contrast to the actual shape and the actual detail within that object. In other words, these values are really low. So we're kind of going from a lower black to black. And if we want that to pop out more, then we need to brighten up the smoke areas and we need to create more contrast. So what that means is that we need some kind of key light to come in here and to essentially illuminate these areas to make them brighter. And as soon as I do that, what you'll notice is that more detail will show up. And in addition to that, it's going to feel like the smoke goes further back into the frame in the dark areas, and the smoke comes further towards you with the bright areas. And that's what we want. That's what I'm talking about when I say contrast. It's about taking bright areas and putting it next to dark areas to bring your attention there and to add more depth into the feeling of that object. So let's go up here, create a light. With this light, I will set that to create, and we are going to create a rectangle. Let's go ahead and bring this up in the Y direction, right along here. And let's be sure that we do not have our camera locked and set this to the Houdini GL for a moment. As soon as I do that, we can move around really quickly and we can position this light. One way that people also like lighting, by the way, is instead of moving it around with the handles like this, which as you can see is kind of laggy, you could just take your camera and point your camera in the direction that you want it to go, like this, and then hold down Control and click on whatever light you want up here. So if I say spotlight as an example, that just created a spotlight which has that angle in mind. So now I put that spotlight in there and we're good to go. Once you do that, jump back to the camera and uncheck the lock icon. So with this light, we can see it's all the way up there. Let's go ahead and keep it there for right now. That's fine. We can adjust the cone angle and how close it is later. But as soon as I have that, switch it over to Karma, restart it, and let's adjust these parameters. Right now our visibility is right here on the spotlight, so let's actually pause this and bring that visibility down underneath the material assignments so that we have the materials there. There we go. So restart the render. On the exposure, we're going to start off with 100. See what that does. It's going to go crazy. Take that in half. 50. Take that in half. 25. 12. And there we go. Now we're starting to get to a normal level. Also, I like taking the color to something that's kind of crazy, like this pink, just to see where that light is hitting. Let's go ahead and look through our camera real fast. And what I'll do is I'll take this exposure up one stop at a time. Every single time you turn up this exposure, it's doubling the light, I believe. So I think maybe a value of 15, 14, something like that. 15 is probably not so bad. I'm going to go less than that though, because this still is technically in a shadow. So I think 14 will work just fine. Let's set that to white and then change the color temperature to something that's slightly warm due to the time of day that this is happening. So something right around there. Now, at this point, I think that we want to think about how to emphasize detail. So I'm going to pause this and overlay once more. Now, as you can see, we're pulling out more of those shapes. We're getting more of that contrast. But when you're trying to pull out detail, you want to think about skimming the surface. So not trying to go really direct, like head on with things. Instead, we want to kind of just graze all these shapes and pull that detail out by just kind of skimming it. So let's look through a light real fast. That's going to be our spotlights. Let's go ahead and look through Houdini GL again. Go ahead and lock it so that we can move this. And I'm going to bring this out kind of right around there. Let's go back to Karma, back through our camera, and restart the render. And there we go. We're starting to skim this. Another thing that you could do is split the windows here. So let's say that we want to split left and right. We can then look through our lights, which is this guy right here. And we can go ahead and resume Karma while we adjust this light over here. Now, for some reason, I can't tumble this light anymore, which kind of sucks. I'm not sure why that's happening by default. But here nor there, we can at least pan it like this. And, well, you know, it's not so ideal that I can't actually, you know, pan this stuff or really tumble this light here. So I don't know what's happening right there, but yeah, we're just going to go back to the regular viewport because I can't actually tumble my light. So here's the spotlight. Let's go ahead and restart the render. For some reason we have depth of field happening now, but I can actually, you know, change the spotlight angle. So I can kind of see what I'm doing. But as you can see, there are some issues with Karma. Its lighting workflow. I don't know if the devs have actually tried to just go through a lighting scenario like this, at least enough to see that this is not ideal default behavior. So do keep that in mind. This is not really that refined at the moment. But if we try to go back to our render cam, let's restart the render. And I think really what we ought to do in this situation is just go back to our GL viewport and try to just adjust this manually. The other thing that's a little bit frustrating is that when we try to assign materials, we don't really have an easy way of updating the viewport with these values. It doesn't actually update it properly. And there's no options here on the shader either to see this viewport better. So even though Karma has some interesting lighting features, we're going to actually go back to the original old school lighting because at least we can control things a bit more predictably there. So we're going to get ourselves out of Solaris and go back to the build, and we'll go back to our object level around here. Okay, so in the next video, let's try to position some additional lights.